Welcome, everybody, to the third episode of our Polyglot Nation series, in which we interview South Africans who speak unusual and interesting languages. Today, I'm very happy, I'm very pleased to have a guest I've been wanting to interview for a long time, my good friend Alessandro Marsh. Um, Alessandro, for those who aren't
Yes,
fortunate enough to already know you, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
sure. So my name is Alessandro Marsh. I was born in Joburg, Bedfordview, to an English South African dad and a Roman Italian South African mother. And yeah, I went and studied in Cape Town for a little bit, and I did a BA in philosophy and Italian language and literature, and then law, which was not very fun, but I'm glad I did it. And now I'm back in Joburg for a bit.
Fantastic, yes. And so parli italiano, ovviamente, no?
Sì, sì,
Esattamente.
penso di sì, spero di sì.
Y- Probably, possibly, probably better than I do. So could you then maybe we can pick up there. Could you share how you first started learning Italian and what inspired you to learn Italian in the first place?
Yeah, sure. So it's actually, I was thinking about this question the other day, really, because I was wondering what one would say is starting to learn.
Mm,
Because I didn't really formally start learning it until I was maybe 16 or 17. And then I majored in it in university. But since I was growing up, my family has spoken Italian at family gatherings and that kind of thing, Roman dialect. So that's another reason I would have had to study real Italian because that's not what they were speaking, real Italian. And yeah, so I'd say it's been like a lifelong journey, but formally since I was probably about 16. And the reason I wanted to learn it is really just because I think you'll appreciate this coming from a similar background to yourself, but to be exposed to a culture that is so familiar to you and so alien to you in so many ways creates a very beautiful kind of contradiction that drives you to want to get to know that part of you or that part of your history. And so it's a very personal reason for me wanting to learn Italian, and that's why I did. Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah, very interesting. And if we maybe delve into the details of how you actually learned Italian, this would be of particular interest, I think, to our community that's always trying to find new ways of more effective ways of learning Italian. How did you go about it? I mean, I know that obviously you took the coursework, so that's a fairly traditional process that has a lot of its benefits. It's also got some of its drawbacks. Um,
Mhm.
but beyond the kind of coursework that you did when you studied Italian, um, how else did you learn Italian? What were your techniques?
Sure. So I'll say something very controversial to start out with, but I'll explain myself. And that's that I started with Duolingo
Okay, yeah.
to learn Italian. And of course, you know, you can have this argument about how good Duolingo is. I think as a tool, very good. What I didn't have were explanations about what I was learning, which obviously I then got by studying it properly and realizing why I was saying what I was saying and that kind of thing. But I think besides that, it's really appealing to your interests is important. Um, Reading about things that interest you in a language that you want to learn. But I think the best way to learn sincerely is to become very close to someone or quite close to someone who speaks the language
Hmm.
you're wanting to learn. I'd say most of my Italian education has come from having opportunities through various reasons to interact with Italians from Italy and speaking with them always in Italian. And it's pretty much becomes a very pleasant practice every day when you have a friend with whom you can speak in another language. So I would say probably the best way to learn was through speaking and but genuinely speaking, not like, you know, manufactured conversations, but
The
genuinely friend to
man
friend
is
conversation.
running down the street.
Yeah.
I would like to order a sandwich. How much
Yeah,
does it
yeah.
cost you now? Exactly.
No, exactly. Exactly.
Well, that's interesting. So, I mean, it's first starting off with a Duolingo point. I mean, that's a very interesting topic because, of course, as many people who are watching this video will know, Duolingo has kind of got a bad reputation,
Mm, mm.
which I'm not entirely certain it deserves
I
because
don't think it does. Yeah.
I think what happens is people often look at it and then they actually misunderstand what kind of product it is, and so they're looking
Yeah.
at it as if it's some kind of elite um, system that's going to take you to the point where you can read like you did, dropping just some
Yeah.
background Alessandro
Yeah.
law, read Marsilio
Yeah.
Ficino. But that's
Yes.
actually not what it
Yeah.
is. The point of the system, the point of the platform is actually to give people the first step in language and just
Yeah.
expose them. Um,
Yeah.
Also critically, and this is a point that my co-founder Laseri makes, and I think it's an excellent point, which is that it also establishes the discipline of learning a language. So it
Mhm.
gives you a solid routine. That idea of maintaining a
Yeah.
streak, it's got a very good function that isn't
Yeah.
primarily or principally linguistic, but it's something that's a prerequisite if you actually want to learn a language well. So that's an interesting point. I'm not surprised at all that Duolingo played an important first stage for you. Um,
Sure.
and then the other thing, I think that's fascinating. When you talked about learning Italian so that you could read more about Italy in Italian, you could also talk with Italians. That is something that I
Mhm.
think we underestimate. Sometimes we get so obsessed with learning the language as the objective, we don't understand that it's also a means to information as well. Um,
Yeah.
my experience
Absolutely.
in Spanish was that one major motivation for learning Spanish was actually an interest in Spanish history. And it became
Yeah.
very evident to me that if you study Spanish history text in English, you can get there are brilliant English speaking historians of Spain and the Hispanic world. That's certainly true. But you will always get a slightly different cultural context from that of reading
Yeah.
those books, similar books in Spanish. And that's the case with every language. You kind of, it changes. There's almost kind of like a perspectival orientation shift that takes
Absolutely.
place when you learn a language, and it's
Language.
much more profound than people typically think.
Oh yeah. No, it's almost like it's addictive when you find it because you realize that language is not just this like static tool. It's like language and culture are fused together.
Yeah,
You know, so when I say a very simple explanation, which is maybe a bit misleading, is some things are not translatable. And I don't think that's strictly true, but there is some sense of, are you really getting what this word means, why it exists in this culture, and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
precisely. Yeah, yeah, and I think there's this interesting question. When you learn a language, I think you could take there are two extremes. One could be addressing the language only as a means to an end, and the other is
Mm.
addressing a language as the object in and of itself. But if you start learning a language, you realize that it's this careful kind of constant flux between these two, in which
Yeah.
the language is really, on one level, it's a system of reference, right?
Yeah.
There's that classic idea in linguistics of the sign and the signified, right? The word and then the
Yeah.
concept, and those are distinct. But on the other end, there's this very profound sense in which, in a language, almost in the way we experience language, the sign and the signified are actually this one and the same. There's in a sense there's almost kind of a power to the word that
Yeah. Yeah.
it sounds kind of like cheesy and mystical, but it is actually
Yeah.
it's I think it's a phenomenological phenomenon
Yeah.
that
I mean, like, sorry, like, if I keep interrupting you, let me
no, go
know.
ahead,
No.
go ahead.
But like, we take for granted how much. I mean, this whole thing of which comes first, the idea or the language, is not as simple as maybe people who haven't thought about it think it is. And there's no clear answer to it, actually. And we need to remember that speaking, for the most part, is how we get any ideas ever. And so the fact that you can easily separate the language you're using and the ideas themselves is just, I don't think it's very true. I think that
Mhm.
they naturally come together in a very connected way, you know?
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. I mean, yeah, that's something that linguists still debate on
Yeah.
vociferously. But it's very interesting that a lot of classical ideas definitely follow this notion that the word and the idea are not as distinct as one thinks. I mean, we could go back to Dante, which you and I are familiar with, right? That's this idea almost of kind of like a nomenological determinism, that the concept and the word are one and the same. That's
Yeah.
very present in the Divine Comedy and in a lot of Dante's writing. It's also present, I mean, if you think about a lot of the heritage of Greek thought, this word logos itself, which is in
Yeah.
itself means
Yeah.
both reason, logic, and idea and language. I mean, it's got And that's just one small subset of the potential translations it could have.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm
Yeah.
very, I must say, I don't know, I'm sure there are, if there are linguists watching this, they'll probably, I welcome the angry comments. I really would like to learn from that, but it is
Yeah.
actually a sort of approach to language that I think is, it's deeply meaningful, and I think it's more true than we've given it credit for since the rise of linguistics. That's
Sure.
my controversial take. Yours was supporting Duolingo. Mine
Yeah.
was
Uh,
less so.
we'll see which one gets more heat.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but in the process of learning Italian, I mean, it wasn't smooth. It wasn't ever easy. It's actually learning a language is a difficult thing. Big surprise
Yeah.
to everyone out there. Uh, what were the major challenges you faced, and how did you overcome them?
Mm. Okay. Major challenges. I'd say, to get technical about it, there are some. The good thing about languages is that humans are not so different. And I'm also scared of linguists coming at me after this. But I was going to say, for the most part, we have the same conceptions of time, of place, and that kind of thing. And so you can find these um, common things in grammar, in different grammars as well, the grammatical systems.
Yeah.
But there are some differences in how we express certain things that, kind of undermine what you thought you were saying in English and what
Yeah.
you're actually saying. So, what can I give as an example? A silly example would be something like the present perfect in Italian. Maybe you'd find it in some older English, but it's not I have arrived, it's I am arrived. And then
Yeah.
suddenly you're realizing, okay, it's a present tense, it's a past tense, and you start to realize that there are many ways to look at grammatical concepts that do differ, and you need to not simply say, "Oh, it's like this in English. Oh, it's like this in my home language." No, this is something I've not been exposed to. This is a new conception of how this language looks at things. So, I'd say maybe that, but I don't want to sound arrogant, but there weren't too many challenging moments. It was a very enjoyable, course.
Yeah, I think also one of the advantages is, of course, Italian is a lot closer related to English than it could easily be. There's a sense in which,
Yep.
if you were maybe learning a Slavic language, then you'd bound to come across other challenges. I think also something that isn't to be underestimated is the almost subconscious influence of being around Italian speakers. You may not think that you absorbed as much as you did, but I found it's the case with when I speak to many people who are now speaking a language or are now formally studying a language that's in a sense that has some kind of ethnic identity tied to their family. They're often a lot better at it because there are certain basic means of expression that are actually intuited beforehand. So I think
Yeah.
that that plays a much larger role. It would be an interesting sort of I'm sure someone's done some kind of linguistic study on that, but it would be interesting also to kind of investigate that in a South African context
Yeah.
because of the
Yeah.
linguistic diversity we have. Hence the idea of this YouTube series. Um,
Yeah.
but if I may say, what's your favorite part of the Italian language? I have a friend I studied Italian with who was obsessed with initial consonant clusters like Zabaglione. No, that's not a good example. It
Oh
would be
yeah.
like uh, Schicchi or something like that.
Scaravaggio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Grazie, quello, sì. What's your
Yeah.
favorite part of the Italian language?
Um, I'm trying not to get too romantic with it. It might be one of those things that I just feel sentimentally or whatever, but I'd say, Italian is so musical in its intonation and that kind of thing. And I feel like, and this is very personal, but I feel like, when an Italian complains about something, or the way you complain about something in Italian, or the way you even like nonchalantly comment on something, brings such weight. The weight of that emotion is so clear beyond the words.
Hmm.
Um, Even like "but" is just perfect as an expression. The idea of "but" is saying something like "I don't know," but also "how am I to know?" or "who cares?" It's just there's so much in the whole expression of it that I love. It really feels like you can't help but sometimes accidentally pantomime in Italian while you're speaking Italian
Yeah,
because it's so
exactly.
enjoyable to engage in it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that involves your hands and your gestures and everything, and it's interesting how much how quickly we adapt to that as learners.
Yeah.
There's this interesting kind of mimetic dynamic
Yeah.
going on there. Um, yeah, there was something particularly. Oh, yes, you were talking about the musicality of Italian. This might be interesting for the audience to know. Um, one of the reasons that Italian, of course, is the language of opera is a linguistic reason because most sounds in Italian are pronounced at the very front of the mouth. There are very few velar sounds in Italian. And anyone who's, if next time you listen to Italian, maybe think about it, and you'll all notice that, and if you try repeat the sounds that you hear, you'll notice that most of them are coming at the front of the mouth. And so that actually means it's a lot easier to sing Italian.
Yeah.
It's in comparison with other Romance languages which have some more, a lot deeper
Yes.
guttural sounds. Spanish comes to mind, Portuguese as well,
Yeah.
particularly.
Yeah.
So there are other historical reasons why opera is often written in Italian, but it's kind of like one of those interesting, um, happy coincidences in history that
Like
opera
the
developed
perfect
in
storm.
history because the language
Yeah.
is ideally suited to it.
Yeah.
Perfect. Now, sort of shifting slightly back to our point on identity. Um, how has knowing Italian affected your daily life and personal interactions, both within and without outside of the Italian community? Because I think something important that I should mention to everyone here is that Alessandro is very involved in the Italian South African community. You are chairman of what organization again? Please remind me.
So we did found the Giovanni, which is Youth Italiani in Cape Town, and I currently am a consigliere or counselor on the comites, which is Comitato degli Italiani all'estero, which is the Committee of Italians abroad. And yeah, I do. It's yeah, it's I feel good participating in these small communities. It's not that small, but small community organizations and such. Yeah,
Yeah, excellent. And sorry if
yeah.
I may repeat the question because it's now been a while since then. How has that affected your daily life and personal interactions with the community? Now knowing Italian, like, um, how does that
Yeah.
affect everything?
It's absolutely night and day. Knowing the language, I mean, and I'm not one to say, because I think there are two extremes, and I don't like either. The one is to say, you have no reason, I'm talking, let's say I'm talking to me, Alessandro, to say you're Italian when you weren't born there, you've grown up your whole life here, um, and you don't speak the language. Let's say it's at that point where I didn't speak the language so well. That's the one extreme, which I don't like because I think it's not very well informed because these things aren't arbitrary. It's not like someone was born and thought, I feel I'm a bit Italian. These things come with their contingencies. And I think the other extreme is to some degree being a bit taking it for granted, so not engaging in any real way with what your cultural identity is. So to say, oh, I'm Italian, not speak a word of the language. And like I said, I don't want to lean to the other extreme either, but not speak a word of the language, not really know much about the country, and sort of just use it as like an interesting fact to tell people with no real, body behind it
Yeah.
or yeah. And so I think learning the language, like we said before, really made me understand the culture better. I also had the opportunity to study Italian literature and Italian history in Italian, which brought me closer to it. And I think it leaves a mark because now, the more you learn a language, the more, and you become bilingual, it really is almost like having another personality to some degree. Like my one friend, my best friend, actually, he made a joke once. He said, Italian Ale is so much cooler than South African Ale because you do act in a different way, you do
Yeah,
project in a different way,
that is
and
true.
suddenly you are interacting with both groups in a different way. And so I think it really gave birth to a sort of new identity, or at least very much edited the original one, so that now, no matter whom I'm speaking to, I'm bringing with it this whole other body of ideas and thoughts and language and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I might as well mention here, anyone who's watching this video, we strongly recommend go ahead and follow the Giovanni page in Cape Town and the Comites as well. There are on Instagram. They're good channels. They'll also update you about any events. I know that we have quite a few members who are in the Western Cape, so they could
Yeah,
definitely
please do
benefit from
join.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've got a new committee there, and they're really engaging a lot more. So please do.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I think you're in the ideal position to answer this. So, amongst the Italo-South Africans, the Italo-Sudafricani, um, how do you find that the Italian language affects their identity? What influence do you see of the Italian language on their cultural identity? Obviously, we're speaking of those who are in the process of learning Italian or have already learned Italian. Um, yeah, what are your observations on that? Maybe if I can put you in the position of trying to make judgments about other people.
Ah, please do. That's never dangerous. So I think I think I can only give a very simplistic answer here. And that is I can only speak for the enthusiasm, the in the true sense of the word, that I've seen students exhibit when they learn not just another language, but their language, the language they've heard
Hmm.
at home, the language they've heard their grandparents speak. And it's like, it's almost like, let's get a bit cheesy here. It's like finding yourself, because all these years you've been saying, I'm Italian, my grandparents are Italian. And now you read Italian, you learn about Italy, and you go, I am Italian. I really have
Yeah,
found it now. And so I think it solidifies, it makes their pride, or it makes their sense of identity a lot more profound and not so superficial. That's what I'll say. Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, a meaning-making process, right? Um, yeah, and then here, this is also sort of related to this. So you actually spoke about how when you went to take formal Italian classes, you were kind of learning the proper Italian, and I put that in I put that in quotation marks, not to in any sense to kind of demean formal standard Italian. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a reason every language has its formal standard, and it's a
Sure.
justifiable reason. But the reason I put that in quotation marks is to distinguish the Italian that you'd learn as a student from the Italian that a lot of us, or a lot of South Africans of Italian descent, would speak at home.
Sure.
Because there is some kind of difference, right? There's a lot of Italians in South Africa are immigrants, uh, mostly from the 20th century. Correct me if I'm wrong. There are a few that
Okay.
come from even earlier, um, and of course they would have brought comparatively rural or localized dialects with them and continued speaking them. So um, that's I suppose I've got kind of two questions that come from this context. The one is um, what what experience do you have with kind of non-standard Italian dialects here in South Africa?
Mm.
And secondly, what's your reflection on how they're being preserved and passed on here in South Africa? That's kind of, yeah, quite a lot to actually
Sure.
answer, but I think it's an interesting
Sure.
topic.
Um, I'll answer the second one first because I have a slightly more maybe pessimistic view about it. And
Hmm.
I think that if people were learning their dialects at home and really knew that, and then they wanted to learn formal Italian, um, then that's fine. That's good, in fact. But because in that way you are preserving the dialect, it is being passed on. I think now, you know, they're not even learning the dialects. So
Hmm.
really, what you're seeing is people not speaking dialect and then being like, okay, well, I want to speak formal Italian, so I'll go take Italian lessons. You're seeing people speaking neither and only learning formal Italian. And yeah, I'm quite sentimental and I like dialect and that kind of thing. So it is a bit sad because I don't think in South Africa they'll be preserved very well, if at all. This, I suppose, the nice thing is initially, actually, when Italians came here, there were some, uh, they were divided regionally in the way they
Hmm.
felt as well. That's not the case with this generation because we're all speaking the same Italian, and we
Yeah.
we we have a lot more in common with each other than previous generations did. Um, where was I going to go with the first point? Um, I hope I'm answering the question you asked me, but
You are. Yeah.
in terms in dialects, one thing I do see is that the pride of a region or a certain part of Italy survives the generations very well. We're still very proud of our regions, and they're expressed through moments where students do know some dialect.
Hmm.
It's always going to come up when Italians meet each other. Let's compare dialects. Oh, my nonna says this, your nonna says that. And there's a particular pride and love that comes when someone is saying a dialect word instead of a formal Italian word. So I think the spirit of it is still very much there. I don't think you'll be hearing many Italian dialects being spoken day-to-day conversation here, but the spirit of that dialect and what it means to people is still, I think, quite prominent.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think sort of this speaks to another interesting topic that affects a lot of South Africans. And so, for our non-South African audiences, for our non-South African audience, the important thing to understand about South Africa is that there are huge immigrant communities that came here in
Yeah.
the 19th century, but lots of them in the 20th century as well. Um, so we're talking about Germans, Italians, Portuguese,
Mm.
lots of Greeks, lots of
Yeah.
Lebanese as well. So the point is that there's this interesting phenomenon I've noticed occurring is that the first generation that came, they'd often speak their kind of their traditional language, their mother tongue, but that was seen more as a hindrance than something to be
Mm.
preserved or be particularly proud of. There was a very nuanced impression that they had of their home country. So there were parts that they had a lot of nostalgia for. There were also many ways in which they'd come to South Africa and they would not see why anyone wouldn't prefer this country to
Yeah.
their homeland. And that's very much the case that I've seen across the board. Um, then, of course, the next generation, so that would be more or less the generation of our parents, um, there it was kind of often a non-issue. Like they didn't really maybe think that much about being Greek or Portuguese or Italian or whatever, what have you. Um, and then suddenly it's with the newer generation that attaches much more to that identity. We could probably explore why that is, because that's actually quite a fascinating idea. You know, I think the internet plays
Yes,
part
very
of it.
much.
I
Yeah.
think this strange kind of dynamic we have where though we actually are open to so much more information, we're in many ways becoming a lot more homogenized, right? So we
Yeah.
can choose what we watch, we can choose what we
Oh,
listen
yeah.
to, but we tend in some sense to progress or kind of like average out to a certain mean. And there's this idea to kind of is this kind of intrinsic desire to find what makes you different.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's part of it. So it is interesting. I've noticed a lot is that now there's probably much more interest in learning Italian, learning Portuguese, learning Greek than maybe our
100%.
parents' generation had. Um,
Yeah.
so that's actually something that touches upon some of what you said there. I think we are coming towards the end of the time for this interview, and it's been really interesting. I actually wish we could go on for an entire hour here because it's been great.
Yeah.
Thinking of the future, so you speak Italian well. También hablas
Yeah.
español, ¿no? Hablas español al menos a un nivel adecuado.
Ah, estoy aprendiendo todos los días, pero no lo hablo muy bien. Dijo
Creo
así.
que Alessandro's being humble. I can verify his Spanish is quite good. But beyond Spanish, is what have you got any languages that you particularly are interested in following Italian up with?
Absolutely. This is I can quick fire this answer. So of course, it's almost weirdly linked to the Italian. I want to learn Spanish. I'm learning
Yeah,
Spanish every day. I'm planning to go to Latin America quite soon, so I can practice and get to know their culture. And then French and Portuguese. But I see this more as like I'm learning the Romance languages. I don't see it as much of a I'm learning something totally different. At the moment, I'm really interested in learning Arabic. So I've started some online stuff with that. Maybe one day I'll get a teacher. I think it's got a lot of utility and it's so different. And yeah, so at the moment, Arabic is probably what I'm going to dedicate a lot of time to. Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
So if there's anyone who speaks it and can get a hold of me, let me know and we can go back to our first point, actually try speak it and learn that way as well. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as predicted, it's been a really interesting interview. I'm really glad that you came on to this channel. Tante grazie, Alessandro, for your time. Yeah, I hopefully we'll do something like this again. Maybe we need to find another
Love
excuse to
to
get some other people in on this and have some
do this
interesting
all the time.
discussions.
Yeah, I'd love this.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
fantastico. Sì,
It's
tante
very cool.
grazie. And to our viewers, we say arrivederci.
Arrivederci. Ciao. Thanks so much.